So we booked this conversation to talk about unicorn versus Medusa, but also about the question of when do we know when something is porn or isn't, or porn or art. Was a question that I thought a lot about while we were showing me, Stuart, Itzia, Holly, and Misha, who couldn't be here today, have been working. She's got stuck working. She might pop in at any time, but we don't know. Anyway, we started working together in 2019. And the first event I've shown with Itzia and Stuart's film, Porn the Theory, was in Athens at IFAC Athena. And I remember it was an historical approach to Stuart's work, and we've shown Porn the Theory, which is a rereading of the butter scene in Last Tango in Paris, but with the genders reversed. After that, we did an exhibition with a couple of their films at Capo Depot and in London. And one was Porn the Theory, and the other one was Bondage, Esteem and Technique, which recontextualized the rope in Shibari as something more linked to gymnastics. So there was nothing sexual about it, even though the video comments on pornography, as it has a series of texts read on top of it, some of them by the artists themselves, some of them by, one is the Spanner case, which was Itzia will know how to explain that one better than I will. Quick on the Spanner case.
Sandy. Okay. Do you want me to explain that now?
Yes, just a quick one.
Oh God, yeah. Yes, it's very long. Well, the Spanner case was a very famous case in British legislation occurred when a group of gay men were sent to jail for filming and distributing, they was in the 80s, okay, VHS videos of their own sadomasochistic activities that they took part in at these, sex parties in Manchester in the 80s, and they recorded them on videotape. And one of them famously, apparently, had somebody having the genitals being pierced and hammered with a nail and hammer. So this caused a lot of uproar in British law and British culture of the time. The case went into the early 90s, from the mid-80s to the early 90s. And, these people went to jail. They were never absolved. The videos can never be seen. Nobody really knows what's in the videos, but say, the rumor is because somebody had the nail put with a hammer through the genitals, which apparently also, again, according to the people who were there at the time, it was somebody who already had a piercing, a cure-healed genital piercing, so somebody just put a nail through it and they hammer it to a table as a form of bondage, keeping that people bound. So, but to cut a very long story short, it changed legislation in UK when you cannot, according to UK legislation, you cannot consensually agree to be harmed. Even if you say, well, somebody punched me, but I wanted them to punch me, doesn't matter, it's still GBH, grievous bodily harm, and so on. Which, of course, there's a lot of questions of consensual BDSM between adults.
Yeah, because it's also discussable on whether that is bodily harm or no, or when it starts being bodily harm, or a representation of it and how much of it is accepted. So on top of Bondage, Esteem and Technique, the film that we've shown, what?
I just wanted to explain why that text was used
Yeah,
in,
okay.
Please, because
which goes back to a lot of film work I've been doing since 2002, starting with my English language colour remake of Screams in Favour of Dessart, the 1952 film by Guy Debord, which is basically a kind of cut and paste between two earlier Lettrist films from the year before. And in that film, he famously he has 5 voices talking, which is the same I've done in a succession of films, including Eclipse and Re-emergence of the Oedipus Complex and Re-enter the Dragon, and then Bondage's theme as technique. But Debord in the original uses 5 voices in French, one of which is a French penal code. And then you see those kind of lettrist film techniques commercialized within the new wave. So Godard uses part of the penal code to do with prostitution in Vivre sa vie. So there's a whole lot of filmic references going on with the soundtrack, and that's specifically invoking both kind of Debord and Godard's much more commercialized use of similar ideas.
Yeah, because when we were just gestating, so to say, this film, we were exchanging, Stuart and I, a lot of emails, and we were talking about a lot of texts and references, from feminism to that, to a lot of things. So yeah, it all kind of came together very effortlessly, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, what we did was essentially cut and paste your approach to the visual making of films involving bondage, which is what you make a lot of for your art projects, and my kind of soundtrack approach, but then kind of discussed it a lot and came up with a kind of hybrid between the two things. But I think when you listen to the film with the soundtrack, it can possibly be porn because the soundtrack is very
It's commenting on what the act is, on what the pornographic material might be, so it's analytical in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And then it doesn't interact with the imagery in a way that keeps the imagery as porn.
Yeah.
Well,
No.
you said at the beginning, Ale, and I need to say something when you said, bondage as theme, as technique is very gymnastic. It's not pornographic or sexual. However, that is a perfectly valid bondage porn film. I could say that maybe with all the texts and all the, all that highbrow text plus legislation being read as a voiceover wouldn't make anybody hard, but you never know. What I've learned from making
Yeah, that's one thing. People,
you can never guess what is going to make somebody feel stimulated sexually.
And also, I mean, in terms of the visuals, I think I'd agree that if you turn the sound off, it certainly could work as porn, and even with the sound, it might do, but it's clearly art and referencing avant-garde film. But the gymnastic element, I don't necessarily think is unpornographic. I mean, I'm jumping in and out of headstands and going down into kind of crows and stuff. So I am doing some gymnastic moves towards the end of the film. But I mean, I'm aware of films even from the early 70s where, people are given blowjobs while in a headstand, straightforward porn films. They weren't made as art films or critique. So I don't think the gymnastic element is necessarily unpornographic.
yeah, maybe just for me.
You separate.
So then they're like, no, gym, not at the gym.
I mean, we are going to talk about art and porn, but, in my work, I sometimes get exhibited in galleries and other times it gets exhibited on Pornhub. And sometimes it's the same work. And of course, people in the porn industry, especially people in the more conventional porn industry, they don't ask me, is this art or is it porn? No, they ask me, but this is not porn, is it? So is it porn or is it porn?
Yeah,
as well, because I've been asked that. So it's not sex, is it? I say, well, for you, sex is genital.
It depends on how you define sex for you. It's complicated.
If genital, and then of course it's not. But that's not everybody's definition of what's sexual or stimulating.
And also, I mean, if you look at some Japanese pink film, there was like the recent big hit, The Glamorous Life of Seikyo Hanai, or whatever it's called, where there's whole scenes where she's with a professor discussing kind of highbrow theory and literature. I mean, obviously it's done partly as a joke, and that broke out of the kind of pink film circuit and got a broader audience, partly because of that content, but it's mixing up intellectual references with what was initially released in a porn cinema context, if people know that movie.
I think it, with
No,
porn
but we will.
being, with so many, porn not being part of, like studios, official studios anymore. Like lots of people make porn for very different reasons. Financial is normally the main one, but it's lots of people with very different backgrounds. So seems that, for the last maybe 10 years, or maybe 6, 7, yeah, let's say 10 years, porn has been incorporating a lot of things into itself, because so many people from so many walks of life are making it, as porn, let's say, survival or financial thing, but also as a way of also, you make it, and your ideas your ideas get incorporating in it without even meaning, deliberately meaning to.
I mean, partly it's to do with the viewer and how they respond to it and how they want to respond to it. And I think a lot is also to do with context. So I think if you're showing it in a gallery, then it's not porn, regardless of what the content is, and regardless of whether it would be porn in a kind of porn cinema context, precisely where you see some. So, I just gave the example of a Japanese pink cinema film that kind of jumps out of a kind of porn circuit and reaches a kind of international film festival circuit audience because it's a quirky kind of take, and precisely because pink cinema, the soft porn in Japan, values cinematic elements and values narrative storytelling. But you could take another filmmaker, you could take Jess Franco from Spain and look at how, I mean, he benefited from the S certificate system in Spain and suffered when it was abolished, where you were allowed to show softcore sex in porn. But now he's looked on by a lot of people as this kind of quite avant-garde filmmaker. But a lot of those movies that he's famous for, whether Yuri Cine or whoever else he was making them for, all sorts of companies. Films like Sadist of Notre Dame, you might watch it as a kind of art film now, but certainly when it was originally released, it was essentially shown as porn. That's from 1975, before he really encountered the problem of not really wanting to make hardcore porn and suffering because his films didn't have the hardcore content.
When I was growing up in Spain in the 70s and 80s, that was Jesus Franco's reputation. He was one of those Z movie, he was very underrated. But, Next Generation, which was actually me, really, really valued him. And, people like Spanish directors now, like, what's his name? Alex de la Iglesia, you probably know him. We went to college together, by the way. They absolutely fucking love him and his way of narrating cinema, much more than the generation before, where people like, oh God, I mean, it was more of the tradition of this auteur that you and I criticized in Porn the Theory. Was the name, the very famous Spanish director of the 70s.
I only watched the horror films.
He directed Cría Cuervos.
Oh, right. Okay.
That's the one. But anyway, well, one of the, he was very much in this European French auteur tradition. So obviously, Jesus Franco was cheap. Yeah.
Holly had a really interesting comment on Porn the Theory when we met in London a long time ago. And I remember I described to her what was happening in the film as a remake of the butter scene in Les Tango in Paris. And she said that she remembered it from when it was in the cinema, the original film.
My mother wanted to see the film. She was a film fanatic. I saw films at young ages that I probably shouldn't have seen, but yes, I remember it.
I think the times were different also. So we've this generation, people are more aware of this type of thing, whilst from Holly's description at the time, it looked like everyone seemed to find it just funny.
Yeah, it was considered quite funny. And I remember her making comments at other times with other people, like, you know, margarine, or should you really use butter, you know, like, which is better, because there was the commercials, better with butter and everything. So yeah, adults were really making fun of the combination.
And
I first saw that film at a cinema club around 1980, and it was promoted as Bertolucci, Brando, and Butter. So Bertolucci, the director, Brando, the actor, and Butter. That was the, you know, the 3-word promotion that the cinema club did on the film to kind of sell it to the audience. You know, obviously the scene was quite notorious. The fact that Maria, the actress, had been forced into it kind of against her will and without her prior knowledge before the scene was filmed, that it was a shock to her what happened, was not known at that time. So I don't think you'd see the film promoted like that now, but I'm saying that, you know, around London in 1980, that was considered a perfectly acceptable way to promote that movie.
You know, it must have inspired so much terrible sex, not to say dangerous sex at the time. All right, that's what you do. And you use butter. Okay, let's try. Oh, God.
Very unhealthy. But anyway, I think now we're at a similar, in terms of technological development, I think my second question was in terms of circulating these films that they were presenting in the social media and making them available as videos in video art platforms or normal short film platforms. And this is something that happened to lots of different artworks, in which I had to ask myself on how am I going to share this? And then we had experiences in which we did share something that didn't seem problematic for us because we didn't have a view of it as if it was harmful or pornographic. However, the common view of it was that it was, or it was confusing, ambiguous. So with it was the third time we were showing films together, and we've shown Unicorn, which is the film that is described on the call of this event. The film has 4 segments. One is by Stuart, one is by Itzia, one is by Misha, who is not here, and one is by Nick Kilby. Another, Itzia invited all of them to each one make a film on the theme of the unicorn. And these were presented together with the installation by Holly called The Silence Drew Off and Laughing with Medusa. And this included about 200 watercolors on paper where Medusa has her hair, it's ambiguous on whether they're penises or snakes. So we had that doubt in terms of social media. Is this going to be recognized as pornography? Is it not? Even with the events, we would put an image up and we would be in doubt if that image would be fine or not. Do we cover? Do we not? Is this going to change? So these have been questions for us, or like parts of things that pass through our process in terms of presenting these works.
Right. You know,
And one thing that comes to mind here is that often when I share a drawing and there are nipples on the drawing is recognized as a problem, but not with the penises or with dildos. Those are okay. So I wonder why the algorithm is more concerned by female nipples than about penises and dildos.
Because they're always obsessed with women's body autonomy, but not with men's body autonomy. It's like, you know, when in 2014, they banned representation, it has to be naturalistic, like video or photo of female ejaculation, whereas there is absolutely no issues with male ejaculation. I'm talking about in porn, you know, within the adult industry, not on Facebook. Obviously, on Facebook, you cannot show any of that. But, you know, the line was drawn there. Male ejaculation is okay, female ejaculation is not.
So you would say that
By the way, that legislation was repealed a couple of years later, but still, you know, somebody thought that it was okay to police women's bodies more, but not men's.
So this will trace back to your experience with what's the name of the agency in 2015, I think?
2013,
2000,
the Authority
yeah.
of Television of Demand. Yeah. To say very, very quickly, you know, when I started selling my own adult fetish content on the internet, you know, parallel to my art practice, that was in 2010, 2011, the most draconian hurdle to go through in terms of what is allowed and what not were visa. If I wanted to have, like, you know, a payment system, a paywall on my website so people could subscribe and watch my videos and I get paid for it, I had to, that went through Visa. Visa were draconian. In 2010, 2011, British, even American legislation were not as draconian. And then it changed. British legislation became very draconian, and they tried to clamp down on all sorts of adult content, British produced adult content. And now again, you know, the problem is again corporation like Visa being much more, you know, censoring much more than, you know, going way ahead of legislation with things like that. But yeah, you know, now people are, you know, really surprised that, oh my God, what I do is not illegal, but Facebook or Twitter or Tumblr don't want to show it. But before, when we had a different platform, you know, it's always been like that. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, to get the go-ahead from Visa, you know, to be able to get paid online for my work, I had to get Visa's approval, and it was tough. So, you know, corporations are always,
I think there's
often more puritanical, although sometimes the British are really true to their reputation too.
I mean, could I just say, I think a lot of the problem comes in, not exclusively, but very much when you're trying to monetize video. So my older work, I might have had problems with it in YouTube, in which case I just either stuck it on Vimeo, but I also have a profile on UbuWeb, which is not searchable by Google, but anyone who's interested in artist sound and artist film will be aware of the site. And it's a massive repository of artist sound and film work. So, you know, the earlier films I referred to that I made, like the remake of Screams in Favour of Dessard in colour and in English, and Eclipse and Reemergence of the Oedipus Complex. Once I'd finished showing those in galleries, they were produced during residency, so I was paid to produce the work. I showed them in some galleries, and then I put them on UbuWeb, where I don't make any money and I've never had any problem. You know, you can put pretty much anything on UbuWeb and it doesn't seem to be a problem. Obviously, it's all art content, but some of the same work might be problematic if I was trying to monetize it.
In which type of platform have you tried to monetize it?
I haven't tried to monetize that old film work. You've been working on trying to monetize my recent film work, and that's where the problems have come up. You know, so maybe I think it was the model of getting residencies and being paid to make the work and showing students how you worked and made the work, and then giving away for free seemed to be a lot easier.
Well, it will be a lot easier, of course. I suppose selling video art, it's not a simple task to start with, and then there's the correct environment for each type of video art and how people are like familiar with that or not, how people interact with it. So it's very experimental in a way. It's first you will look for a place where the payment processors will accept what you are presenting as video art. You will need to make sure that they agree with whatever you determined there, that it's video art. Then once the platform does agree, there's still the payment processor, which is like what Itzia was saying about Visa. So PayPal can determine that a certain video piece is pornographic and refuse to process your payments on it. So
Yeah, well, I've just had a bunch of videos on my, again, I've got a fetish account on OnlyFans, and I've just had a bunch, and by a bunch, I mean a big list of videos removed because I cannot prove, because they need a different 3 forms of ID of the other people who take part on these videos, the videos with 1 or 2 other people. And some videos are again 10 or 8 years old, and I cannot get all the forms of ID that they require because I cannot get in touch with these people. I don't know the real names and I don't know where they are.
I think we need to explain that in the UK, you're not expected to do this type of check on people, which you are expected to do in the US.
Yeah, you know the way I presented these people's ID is totally legal in UK. Yeah.
Yeah, just for critical conversations that you're screening, I stood there with a clipboard and they handed them out for everybody that got in, and it just said you were giving permission to be, you know, videoed and shown anywhere in any place later. And I also ended up, I mean, you just had to do that. It was just a simple, straightforward, and you dated and signed it. You just knew you had to do it. So yes, San Francisco, I don't remember if I did that in Australia. I might have, you know, maybe people signed before. But Australia, you'd be aware that somebody said the word bloody in one of those conversations, and the sponsor, which was an arts nonprofit in Melbourne, wouldn't screen it. They watched it and said, oh no, someone said bloody, we will. They paid me and the whole thing to be done at the festival, and then they wouldn't screen it.
Because of one word.
One word.
Oh, yeah, I mean, this happens on OnlyFans a lot. And this is the reason why Stuart's biography on the details of this event reads 6 and 10 novels. It's because on OnlyFans, you cannot write the word 16. You also cannot write the word child. So Holly moved in her biography, she moved a lot as an adult and as a child. Because yes.
As a child.
A chilled child.
Yeah, you know, this is the censorship that we have to put up with these days. It's not about the legislation in every country, it's about what the corporations dictate.
Within those environments. And I think I think there's that also. There's a lot of video art I'm sharing on OnlyFans, which is not pornographic. And with those, I wasn't as concerned with having their IDs and everything because there's nothing graphic happening. And with Stuart and Itzia's films, I was definitely sort of like, let's make sure we have your IDs if we need to, shall we? And yeah, I think this was a good thing. But since in the case of Holly's, we do have children in the limo, but they're in a context that isn't sexual at all. And it could never be confused to be. sexual. But in a case where it's ambiguous, I wouldn't feel comfortable placing it there, I suppose, because I'd assume someone who's looking at that platform and sees it might be confused, because it's art. It's naturally, the text is not always enough for people to notice that this isn't what is meant.
What about the yummy mummies on Instagram with its beautiful, perfect Aryan children who also they use OnlyFans, because OnlyFans was created, sorry, as a kind of attachment for Instagram, so you could kind of monetize your Instagram by offering like longer video content and stuff like that. So yeah, many Instagrammers are these moms with perfect family lives and children. So I don't know how they do that. I mean, it's unbelievable that we are talking about this, as that it's 2021 and we are talking about, you cannot say child, you cannot say 16. I mean, it's bloody surreal. Oh God, I said bloody, sorry.
No, and there's all sorts of other problems. I mean, for example, which I experience on YouTube rather than Vimeo and Ubu, for example, with copyright. I mean, I just had 2 videos which used drum loops from a copyright-free sample album, which I actually bought in Brazil in 2004. And someone's claiming copyright on this stuff, but I bought the CD precisely because it was copyright-free. But I can't find the CD to prove what it was that I used, and that it's copyright-free. Precisely because people think, oh, maybe you're monetizing the videos on YouTube, which I actually don't, because it creates a whole lot of problems if you want to monetize it. So I didn't get copyright strikes for someone claiming copyright on copyright-free samples. And in the past, I've had problems with copyright because I used Northern Soul tune by a record company that went out of business, but someone claimed that the owner, he'd gone up to the owner one day and the owner had verbally assigned him all the copyright, which YouTube seemed to think was perfectly valid proof of copyright. He had no documents or anything else, but you can't be bothered to fight this stuff. But it's a constant problem with people claiming you're infringing their copyright when you're not at all, and people claiming copyright on things that they don't have copyright on.
Yeah, I think this is something that's also a problem now with the NFTs, which is there were lots of stories of people creating non-fungible tokenized art of works that they didn't actually own.
Jerry Saltz was doing that and posting it on Twitter and other things. He was taking art from museums and art from even some people that are living that are well known and making an NFT out of it.
You make
the Jerry, what? It's why, and just stop it.
And they're making the comment that people are doing this really ugly thing, and then Holly goes sort of like, "Well, Jerry Saltz was doing it."
He was. And he's bragging about it and putting it up. And then he sold one, is it for charity, and made $90,000. I mean, but it's not his work.
Yeah, but I think even
he said, look what I did for this hospital charity. And I'm like, And he doesn't really understand the whole thing, because the same week it came out in the New York Times, his wife writes for Roberta, that there was a whole thing on the energy in China. And I go, did you read the article in the New York Times just on the energy use part of blockchain? No, this is great. Okay, Jerry.
Yeah, I suppose people will have different understandings of things, but on his case, it seems he was photographing famous artworks and making them into digital NFTs by Jerry, no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And saying they're Jerry.
Which I suppose it's still different from going into a database of like a poor digital artist transferring their work into an NFT and making it into an NFT. And by the time they want to do the same, they arrive at the platform and the work is already registered.
Right. If a museum or somebody wants to do something, it's like, forget it. Jerry did it. He owns it.
Oh, yeah, maybe. So and this was something else that caught my attention in relationship to porn, because it was a question that was instantly in my head with the NFTs. It's sort of, did people do porn like that? Because while I see no reason to make a piece of digital art into a non-fungible token, porn is something that is stolen just for what it is. It's sort of like what people want to see is that video. And then, yes, maybe one original file makes sense in that context. And I was sort of like, did they do it? And then there was article in Rolling Stone describing femdomin non-fungible tokens. And I think I sent this to Stuart probably, and we spoke about it. And it was generally femdom porn, and the platforms they were in touch with the platforms just discussing this, and I think it was taken down because there is no verification process in these platforms. Like verification process, I mean age verification. So in theory, not the people who are putting it up, nor the people who are buying it are verified for their ages.
Well, ultimately, you cannot verify anybody because you're not in there too. I mean, somebody goes on Pornhub, anyone can go on Pornhub, and nobody asks them. There is no wall in place because that was another of when my work was put down by the British states or British government, was that it was the reason that I didn't have anything in place to prove that people accessing my website were over 18. I said, well, they use a credit card, but of course you can use a debit card, and in UK you can have a debit card at 16. So apparently that was the hole in the law that you can purchase it with a debit card, but it could be your mom's, or you could be 16 or 17, still underage. So that's another issue there. How do people show that they are old enough to access that? Again, unless they become very, very draconian, they try to, and actually they want to do that in UK again. They want to bring legislation where, you want to access the internet, well, not the internet, sorry, adult material, like all those adult websites. You have to give your name, you have to give your personal details. And of course,
at the moment, what we have here are splash pages. So all you have to do is click that you confirm you're 18.
Yeah, which of course it means, it doesn't prove anything. Anybody can click, yes, I am over 18. Yeah, of course, the alternative again is very scary because it would be giving your personal details, because those things, those databases, they never get hacked, obviously.
Well, in a way, thinking about Facebook and Instagram, those have a limit age of 13, and it's a problem with advertising legally, which is they can't analyze the data of people who are younger than this. And apparently it's an offense for a parent to register their kid if they're under 13 years old, I think. And this has been like broadly discussed. And you also don't need to give ID into any of these social platforms. So I ask myself, should you?
Because that's the thing, once you give your personal details, they go into a database and they can be hacked, and it's happened. So, trying to hack those databases just to say, just to put out in the open who's been watching porn and what porn, it's very juicy for, it's so ripe for abuse. But we are not talking about art. Can we talk about art? I'm so fed up with porn.
Yes, let's go.
Right. Does anybody want to talk about art, or you only want to talk about porn?
I I think we are talking about both, because the videos that we mentioned, they are often in a gray area. And I think the main thing for me was to discuss how this circulate in digital environments and how these are seen. So yeah, we had some of those, we were promoting them on social media, and we had some of those posts taken down, even though there was no nudity within the posts. And people actually need to register where in the database where they are. So it's not like we actually breached any regulation, but it was assumed we were trying to sell massage.
Well, you have probably broached the whatever terms and conditions are, which is not a law and it's not necessarily regulation. It's just the platform T and terms and conditions, T&Cs.
Well, we had a problem with a different film. I remember I had posted Holly's punctuation performance, and it was a short clip on Instagram and Facebook. And they took it for an advert for psychology therapy. And they said that you can't advertise therapy on Facebook unless you're accredited. And I was sort of like, what?
So it wasn't any specific one, or was it one of the specific ones they didn't like?
No, it was the short clip that is 1 minute long about punctuation performance that groups a little bit of the 4 films and a description of it. And I remember
the one film with Emily dashing, when people have seen it, just start laughing because they're like, they feel that, well, that's a sexual reference. And so
the thing is,
the blowers going, and people are in an audience watching it that way. When I've said, oh, here's a blower, and have everybody do a blower, or when I've done a live performance and people say, that's a reference to sex. I said, hey, she did dashes.
I don't think they took it for that. I think it was more in the description. There was this one phrase that we had in that was, we are not responsible. Yeah, and we are not responsible for anything that you might do watching this performance. And it was kind of humorous in a way. Because
which I wrote that. That's on the video I wrote as description when
Yes.
Because I said people could do this as you could have a little private party to cheer up and watch this and do it, but I'm not responsible, which is, the legal terms that a museum or videos, movies, everything says, oh no, these aren't real people. These aren't, so you can't hold us responsible for anything. Or if you got any ideas, you can sue us because you said, well, I saw that, and I'm going to do that now. Nope. So I figured, okay. So I threw it in. It's a humorous that everything has these long legal descriptions behind them. You can't ride a bicycle, you can't get anything. And it says, we're not responsible for anything you do with X. So I thought I'd throw it on. It was funny. It's supposed to be funny.
Yeah,
things we've been told.
And I read it in this way, but in terms of how an art text is interpreted by an algorithm, which isn't a person. So an algorithm is looking at that and it's thinking that we're suggesting something harmful in the film or something that people should or shouldn't do. And that phrase immediately makes them target that video as wrong psychological advice.
I got thrown off of Twitter a couple months ago for somebody said, and she's a writer and a novelist, and she said, I can't stand it. Don't tell me to go for a walk. I really just, this whole thing is really getting me. And I said, okay, so hit your head against a wall. And we were both thrown off of Twitter. for suggesting violence, and her saying, you know, we're like, wow.
So you're not on Twitter now?
Well, yeah, I quickly set up a different one, and everybody that was following me, I sighed and said, okay, and told people I was thrown off for telling someone that didn't want to don't tell me what to do, and I can't stand anything anymore. And I said, okay, so go hit your head against a wall. Maybe that'll help.
And that was the end of it?
It instantly that account was gone. So I set up another one. And when you could back channel and tell people, you know, I couldn't access it, but I could message them saying, okay, I moved to here.
Oh.
I think they sent me something like a month ago saying I can now activate it again. They've taken me out of the penalty box. I'm like, whatever.
No, you no longer need it because you're already reset.
Yeah.
You know, there is a lot of talk at the moment in media everywhere about this dumbing down of culture, but it is a thing, you know, this is part of it. They say, well, it's not actually, yes, it's the algorithm understood Holly's comment as, I don't know, inviting people to kill themselves or something.
Exactly.
Not us, it's the algorithm, but it's an excuse. There is a dumbing down of culture, you know, as we've seen it with things like Brexit, and, you know, the way people have been sold politics, both in US and in Britain, and culture. And I wouldn't be surprised if this permeated into the real world, you know. I'm a bit wary of what's going to happen to say, yeah, you know, okay, you cannot show your videos on Vimeo or even on OnlyFans without being censored, but you can show them at the real gallery. Okay, let's wait and see, because, you know, the culture is being so eroded of nuance and subtlety, and, you know, just becoming very dumb. And, you know, the only things that are accepted is things in very black and white, and they have a very clear meaning. Hitting your head against the wall means an invitation
to violence.
Murder.
Violence.
Yeah, nothing else. And of course, you know, art is the exact opposite of all that. It's all about the nuance and the, you know, reading between the lines. Obviously, something that the algorithm or the people who write the algorithms, because algorithms don't just happen, I don't know, don't want to address. And I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, culture in general, in real life and everywhere, becomes more and more dumbed down.
I mean, we've addressed this on social media. I mean, Itsy in particular with the algorithm recommendations. I've, for example, had an interest in a Japanese horror film called Organ and made some searches to do with it. And then I had ads trying to sell me electronic organs, which, you know, nothing to do with a Japanese horror film. And also I'm getting quite a lot of recommendations that I might be interested in books I've written, you know, which I don't think I'm going to be buying them online, but yes, I do have an interest in them, so they're getting a bit closer. But you, Itsy, you've been publishing a lot on Facebook of silly recommendations as well, which is just another example of how the algorithm doesn't get things.
Mm. Yeah, I'll get all the silly recommendations. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, the Emperor's New Bra, and I get a lot of the houses, baby houses, kids' houses, pink generally.
Houses, yeah. And, you know, I've been listening to a lot of podcasts about, you know, how people get radicalized because, you know, you do a bit of research into things that are, you know, into anything to do with the current culture wars, and you get precipitated into a rabbit hole of ideology, like immediately, like, you know, like YouTube starts showing you far right stuff like straight away. Or obviously, you know, there is no paywall, or let's call it no ethical wall for that at all. But yeah, you know, you show a nipple and off to the gulag.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but it's also, I think it's a problem of recognizing. It's harder and harder to recognize those discourses as they turn up. And especially in social media, it's to a certain extent, you're dealing with algorithms that will recognize what is graphically happening in the image. So it's easier for them to recognize a nude body than it is to recognize hateful speech in a way, if it's
Yeah.
depending on how it is phrased.
Yeah. And that dumps things down even more because again, the culture wars are about things in black and white. Are you with us or against us? So yeah, I wonder how art is going to fare in the next few years for this reason, for all these reasons. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if there is much more censorship also, like in real life, in galleries and museums.
Well, some galleries and museums, I remember back, sometimes have had to put up signs warning about the context in some of, some show. I remember UCLA MFA show did, I specifically had one. And yet when I saw it, it was like, okay, there's nothing really going on, but any nudity or anything, might have been, even though you're making a comment about violence in a way that you were making a cultural political comment, not like you were advocating for it, but they have to they put up signs, little things warning you, maybe you don't, you're same thing, the permission slip. You're saying, okay, I'm entering here. And if I'm upset, that's, we've already warned you. So.
And the next step, and it's probably happened already, because all these, as all these big museums are all sponsored by, the big sponsors are big corporate firms like BP Oil and all the rest of it, Shell and people like that. They're probably going to start making demands and saying, we don't want this type of art, we don't want to sponsor this artist or this type of art.
They have historically already, done that because they're tying themselves to certain image and promoting it, saying, that's what they're doing. They're not being, hi there, we just love any art. No, they want their corporate logo to be tied in to that specific thing. So yeah, they've literally sometimes said, no, we won't show certain things.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, they pay the piper, they demand the tune that they want. And I can only see this happening more and more, no less.
I mean, I think it's been happening for a long time. If you look at institutions like the British Council, they're, British soft power. I mean, every nation has these organizations to promote itself. But they're not neutral, and they want to project a certain view of England. And some writers and artists who they find amenable can make very nice careers out of being sponsored by the British Council. I mean, they wouldn't have careers otherwise. But they're quite fussy, and always have been quite fussy about the kind of image you're promoting of Britishness or whatever it is they're into abroad. So my own experience has been that the only time I've got anything from the British Council is when someone abroad has absolutely demanded that they wanted me, and the British Council has kind of caved in. They've never really offered me anything otherwise. And, every major country will have that kind of institution on a national scale, and then the corporations reflect that as well, that they want to project a certain kind of culture. And you can look in, I would walk past the Bloomberg Gallery in London, in the City of London, all the time. And it looked like very, through the window, I mean, they're doing building work on the building, so you can't see into it at the moment. The gallery's obviously closed, but it would look very corporate and bland every time you walk past. And oh, there's a new show. It looks just as bland as the last one.
Yeah, but public institutions, I know I'm sounding like a romantic here. I know it's true, but it's not. They have some kind of accountability, but a private corporation like Bloomberg has absolutely no accountability at all.
Well, I mean, I think the taxpayer-funded arts organization as well have a quite specific agenda, and
yeah, no, I agree.
I don't think they're alone. Many, many years ago, I had documented, there's the highway system in the United States put in after World War II, and it's the freeways or turnpikes, okay? And it was laid out by the federal government. And there was one little segment in Los Angeles that was, I think, 17.2 miles. And it was the very last segment of this thing that was put together in the 50s. And now we're dealing in the 90s. And I decided to document, what had gone on from its original little quotes about roads and then the pop song title. So it was a little booklet with the pop song title. And, I love being, somebody saying a quote about a road, some poet, major writer. And then what happened historically, and what historically was between the governor of California's, they would change and the presidents would change. And it became quite humorous. And the freeway, the engineers, I printed it, and then I had some visuals, like a tar paper rip because somebody wanted something, and nails in it, and they wanted to put it in the Building Museum in Washington, D.C. at Clinton's inauguration. It would have been up for a year, about the United States is, and the engineers liked it, and they told me they submitted it, and I was like, oh, okay. And the curator got in touch. The curator liked it. They liked the irony. They liked the fact that first it was like no freeway, bike paths, just continually changing this little last segment. And the Clinton administration had it removed before the inauguration, so no one could see it. And there was a blank space in my card saying the road, and that's all that was there. So it's not just, say sexual things that anybody with power decides, they didn't want this. And all it was saying was, here we have the government democratic process of people saying they want this, no, we want that. You elect different people, and they went back and kept rediscussing this 17.2 stretch, because people's houses are removed and everything. But before they even did that, it was everyone's input over a 40-year period. I had cards and things and some visuals. So, yep, it's a problem.
Should we open this to questions? Because
Sure.
we said we should, and we're 25 minutes now, so I think it's probably the right time.
I had one fast comment. Kathleen Sullivan, when my husband was at Stanford Law, that's when I was doing the freeway thing, attended a meeting, and then it was a very large conference, and she that freedom of speech was only speech, and that visuals should be excluded from that. And she was quite serious. She wasn't throwing it out like devil's advocate. So I think that's why the whole thing is somewhat still has a problem, because you're like, okay, you can write stuff in books and do stuff that people, but you have freedom of speech, but you do a visual. She wasn't too sure about that because it said speech. I'm like, okay, now you can open it.
Funny enough, I've been writing about that.
We're in a visual media.
Yeah, I've been writing about that for my PhD, because especially in terms of, sexual content, in a book, a sexually explicit book in this time and age is not going to be censored, but the visual image that is graphic can. They have, I suppose it's because it's that kind of a structuralist thing, when obviously, representation of a sexual act is closer to the real thing than a word description of it.
And
I found it quite interesting. 1998 or 1999, and she's quite serious about it. And here we were, here we were in California at Stanford, and it was a large conference on First Amendment. She's saying she didn't think it covered a visual.
So it was free to write and say whatever, but image-wise, this wasn't covered.
That's what she was arguing, and she basically she was dean of Stanford Law School. She'd come out of Harvard and clerked and everything. So it wasn't like a minor person making this argument. And it wasn't like throwing it out and we're going to argue about this. She was quite serious about she's a constitutional law expert. So
Yes, but that's
I since I was there as, you know, like as a guest in church, I didn't argue with her, comment on it. It was a large conference, but I was always sort of somewhat shocked. It's like, wow, she thinks speech is only words. So in art, we're having to deal with corporations. We're having to deal with people that don't, you know, have very narrow understanding, even though she's a rather educated person, saying, yeah, this just that's.
Holly, you broke up a little bit. I couldn't hear the last two sentences.
I know I'm stable. Unstable here. I was just saying it's interesting.
Yeah.
But we have to be that and take things within their field rather literally.
So I'm gonna open this to questions. If anyone wants to ask us about anything, the works, the talk, etc. Anyone? Thank you. Are you
there? Everyone's still.
Let me see if there is.
Yeah.
Cool. Is there an unmute everyone? And should I do that? Okay. So tell us, Stephen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know if is my mic coming through.
Yeah, it is.
You can hear me. All right. It's not a question, and it's just gonna. I'll say it. I'll just say what came to mind anyway. You were talking about. Well, it came up with like public institutions, publicly funded art institutions, that kind of thing. You know, I was thinking about by now very well established, say 60s, 70s performance artwork, you know, that I don't know if I can pronounce the name correctly. Carolee Schneemann, Interior Scroll, works like that. The stuff she did with Brackage. I mean, this stuff is well ratified by now. You know, it's well established part of modern art history. And I wonder what happens I wonder if there's any kind of connection with any of the contexts you've been discussing here with work like that, you know.
I don't know the work, so someone will have to.
I don't want to describe it because I have to watch my language probably.
And you write the names on the chat.
It's Carly Schleeman. You probably know her work, Meet Joy from '64. This is a really well-known happening piece. I met her in New York in '89 at an opening, but I knew who she was. Carly Schleeman. She's quite. I mean, she kind of like a lot of those artists from that period was in a bit of an eclipse at that point. So she felt she was very neglected when I met her, but I met Billy Name at the same time from the Factory, and he was kind of amazed that I knew who he was. So a lot of those people.
Yeah, I did a bad job of asking a question as well. So I'm sorry.
No, I would imagine that the work circulates in kind of more purely art circles and doesn't encounter problems, but I don't know. I wouldn't imagine a lot of the problems come out with either trying to monetize it through streaming or kind of using social media platforms. Although obviously you sometimes have the famous kind of artworks, you know, even very old paintings with nudes in them that have problems on Facebook and wherever else. But I would imagine precisely because she has that established reputation now that, you know, she'll just be circulating in those high art areas and not have a problem.
So her work is taught in art school. That's the main encounter, like on a BA, when you first encounter performance art from an academic point of view, in combination with feminist literature. She's the poster for that. So it is being shown a lot, just perhaps not within the monetizing context that we were previously discussing. No?
Yeah, it made sense to me. And also because she's established within that context, so people are considering it in an adult educational context, like university level.
I've got a question about image, if that helps.
What?
We're talking about how text is being less censored, right? And we're thinking,
well, it is currently, not in the past, but
yes,
at the moment, or right now.
You know, because with certain types of, let's say, global issues coming to the forefront, I had a very positive shock of actually going to a Tesco and seeing quite good literature at a Tesco. So there is no more excuse. In terms of literature, a lot of it is becoming available. But in terms of image, I think it's very interesting what you're saying about imagery being censored within that context. Like, how do you see the future of that? Because we, you know, there is some leeway now with text, but how do you all, like Stuart, Itzy, Holly, Ale, how do you see that changing also within your work?
As I said earlier, the change for me is from, what we are not, I've said it, I'm going to repeat myself, we are not so much being censored by governments or the states or public institutions as much as by corporation, by as much, what I mean is that Facebook and Twitter are have much more important cultural impact than the British Council. Fight me. And those are the ones who really are doing the censorship, but those are the ones who are really fucking us over and preventing artists from distributing or showing their work. No so much legislation, although I do know that there is some pretty awful legislation that may or may not come to pass in UK. Brexit first and then COVID has really stop that for now, but it might come back. They are really, really concerned. The British politicians are very concerned with children and what children, and with in the internet and with people making porn. They don't like it. And as Stuart suggested, monetizing it. Oh my God.
Do you feel like there is no way to break that boundary, or do you feel like there is some sort of hope? Because I can't remember who the writer was, but they released a fabulous text in relationship to dancing in the pandemic, that I refuse to dance, it's not my revolution, right? So heteronormative construction about being forced into the household and doing a very 50s approach of lifestyle, yet again being brought to the forefront, and from this quite Orwellian perspective, the supervision. So do you all feel like you can't put your work out there? Like, do you feel like there's a severe barrier that can't be broken, or do you feel like there is a way to push through it so that your work can actually be seen?
I think there's a difference depending on whether you're trying to monetize it or not. I think you can get the work out there, but the size of the audience might be quite small. You know, so if you put stuff on UbuWeb, you know there's a dedicated audience who are going to be interested and know about that, but you're not going to find anyone looking at the work by accident. They will have gone to UbuWeb because they're interested, because it's deliberately not Google searchable. But as Itzy says, the kind of censorship on the bigger platforms where you can find an audience is difficult. And, you know, you can, I don't have the same problems because my work is quite varied and most of it doesn't visually have a strong pornographic content. So it, you know, it's not such a problem for me, but the size of the audience is very restricted because it's still people who have money behind them and PR getting a lot of attention. And, you know, you look at almost any story that kind of in the media and a lot of things that go viral, it's actually, there's PR and money behind it. And if you haven't got that, it's hard to find a big audience. But it depends how concerned you are about the size of the audience, because I do stuff that I really don't care if it doesn't have a particularly huge audience. It's there to be found by certain people who can utilize it and who do hopefully find it. And in fact, who I know do find it. But it makes it hard to make a living. But for me, it's not a huge problem in terms of getting things out there and finding a certain audience, a specific audience. But in terms of a mass audience, that's very difficult and it's very controlled.
But do you all feel like, for example, all of your work is now on display on multiple platforms and an international independent art fair with hyperlinks to works that do have explicit content? Do you think that this is something that you want to keep pursuing in terms of a halfway point, right? Because there is the gallery that puts the work forward, but then there's the art fair. So there are institutions to some degree, perhaps not the ones that we're talking about, but there is something there, yes? And there is a monetizing factor to it because your video works are on a private viewing platform where somebody has to pay to see it. So is this the future? Is this how this is going to go? Because I don't think any of you are particularly interested in doing NFTs.
Well, you know, I think that we have been talking about, you know, that this last year, because we have been living online, and if not, we have been living little house of the prairie at home, having our sweet 50s lives in lockdown. I think that's why at the moment we're thinking about that a lot, because it really has stopped, you know, the arts having stopping the tracks. But, you know, as soon as we start having art in real life, in, you know, meat, flesh space, it will be very different. Yeah. Again, you know, the internet and social media platforms will be more to make people aware of its existence rather than having to show it. The problem that Ale in Darling Pearls has had in showing some of the videos that Stuart and I have been making together these last couple of years is that they are very graphic and explicit and they look like porn. So to show the whole piece online, it's a problem, but we can show it in a gallery and it's fine.
Yes, there's that. And I think, hello? Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
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 Oh, now I hear you also. I lost sound of everyone for a second. Okay, good. I think answering more broadly what Rolina was asking about, none of us wants to have NFTs, but we are, however, selling video art and video art views in a series of different platforms. Yes, I think a video artist should be paid for views of what he does. For me, this makes sense.
Because the thing that, you know, in the art world is still 500 years behind, and the art that sells is mostly painting, like by a huge minority. Of course, there are museums and institutions who buy weird stuff or who pay you to do a performance, but the money in the art world is still in two-dimensional stuff that you put on a wall. I don't know, I might be completely wrong. Please correct me.
No, I think to a certain extent you're right, but also there is, I think for me, what I thought a lot about in this sense was the amount of work I was doing to make all this video art available online. And it was really time consuming. I'd say that sort of like, I don't know, if you create a database with 50 videos, that's time consuming in itself. Yes, that's going to take you like 2 weeks to do. Why should you do it for free with your work? Why should the artist not get paid for what he done? Why should the group of people that made that archive available online not be paid? So I think this is what I thought was reasonable in this sense. And we do have a lot of subscription-based platforms for films. You have Netflix, you have Amazon Prime, you have sort of different platforms where people pay subscriptions to see videos. And now you do have a few video art ones, and they do work on pay-per-view methods. And it's usually really low priced. Which is something that we talked about in relation to the music industry, and we considered on how much we would price the art, really.
Well, musicians don't get paid anymore so but it's happening in all areas for creative areas. People don't get paid. People get asked to write articles for free, that cliche about exposure. Yeah, it's getting harder and harder to expect people to pay for creative content.
So, yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say, that's kind of like bigger than be selling art that's graphic or not. It's more to a video art in general. That I believe it should be paid. Yeah.
I know text came up a few times, and the difference between how you're a bit freer if you're working in text. You can basically write anything, I guess. There's one thing I'm pretty certain Stuart has written as a blog about was it R.B. Katai and David Hockney art school days, which is kind of like a flash fiction porno mashup thing. I think trying to get something like that publicized or released would be a nightmare for obvious reasons, because Hockney's still alive. But,
No, it's interesting you should mention that, because in fact, I've taken some of that offline and will proceed to take all of it offline eventually, because it's completed as a book. And I had a publisher come to me the other week and said they'd be very interested in seeing something from me. And I said, oh, well, I've got a book in first draft I can't show you, but I have a novel in first draft, but I have another novel that's completed, but you might not like it because there's libel issues, although I don't think there'll be a problem. It's like, no, we're not interested in that. When you've rewritten the book that's only got a first draft, let's see it. And other companies who I'm in contact with are exactly the same, because the libel laws absolutely terrify publishers. But it's not just that book. The previous book, Denizen of the Dead, which is an anthology of anti-gentrification fiction, I mean, that had a publisher at one point, and they went to a lawyer before they went ahead with the editing. He said, oh no, you can be sued for, it's a collection of horror stories set in a ghost flat development. And the lawyer told them that they could be sued by the company who owned the development for denigrating their building. And other people were saying that's absurd, but I was aware of this happening to someone in Hong Kong being sued for kind of slagging off a building. I didn't think it was likely because it could have the same kind of repercussions as the Mac libel trial for the company involved. And in fact, I did have a company who were prepared to do the book, but I wanted the book published by the time the Ghost Flats investment flats were finished. So I ended up putting it out myself because the company who wanted to do it, who weren't worried about the libel issues, couldn't do it in the timescale I required, and it'd been delayed from being at one publisher, assuming that it was going to come out. But yeah, I mean, the libel laws are very repressive. And for example, in my novel based on my mother's life, she did have encounters with John Lennon, but Brian Jones stands in for two other people who are alive and very rich in the pop world, who couldn't possibly be named. And at the time I wrote the book, I don't know if it's true, but my mother claims that in 1964, Sean Connery, the actor, I can say this now because he's dead, I think it is true. I can't prove it. The actor was paying for her to give him attention as a hostess at Churchill's Club in London. But again, that was something because I did that with Virgin, who are a corporate publisher. That's the kind of detail you can't put in. You have to be careful about who you choose. I had one publisher refuse the book because they were horrified by what I had to say about John Lennon. But as far as I could tell, it was true. It wasn't a libel issue, but he was a John Lennon fan, the editors. That created a problem. But yeah, libel is a huge, huge issue in relation to writing. And I mean, copyright is also a big issue. I mean, Kathy Acker had a book pulp because she had 4 or so pages she'd appropriated from Harold Robbins. And obviously, you read a Kathy Acker book and you expect part of it to be plagiarized. I mean, that's something I also do. I have all sorts of blogs, not necessarily all under my own name. And I have one blog where I basically take Wikipedia articles. I haven't been doing it lately, it's an old blog, and rewrite them to show what's wrong with the editorial style on Wikipedia. And there's someone who constantly goes on the blog leaving comments berating the blogger for stealing other people's work wholesale and, you know, not having a clue about what the purpose of the blog is, even though it has been explained to them in replies to comments. So there can be a lot of problems and a lot of misunderstanding around those areas when you're writing. And also, I mean, just in terms of getting something published in 99, I did the novel Cunt with Do Not Press. I'd previously been with Serpent's Tail, who wanted the book, but not with that title, but I didn't want to change it. But when Do Not Press agreed to do it, it went to more than 40 printers who all refused to print the book. And the one they finally got to print it would only do it if we didn't have the name on the cover. So yeah, I suggested we did stickers, which is what we did. So yeah, there can be an awful lot of problems with the written word as well. And
sorry, that was the printers, not the publishers. The printers wouldn't do Cunt.
The publisher had to go through dozens and dozens of printers before they found a printer who would agree to print the book, and the printer they found wouldn't print the title on the spine. They said they'd print it as long as the title wasn't on the spine, so we found another printer to print stickers with Cunt, but they weren't a book printer. I mean, yeah, it's kind of surprising.
The workarounds of it, it's just you print it with stickers.
Yeah, exactly. There are workarounds. You know, but prior to that, I put together an anthology of the radical New York groups, Black Mask and Up Against the Wall, Motherfucker. And we had no problem with the word motherfucker, which is I look at as a technical term from Black Radical Lexicon. It's describing a specific abusive practice by slave owners. But yeah, no, I mean, you do encounter problems with words as well.
We have reached the time end of our event, so I'm gonna let anyone say anything else they might want, but we need to wrap in 10. It was really nice to see all of you. Thank you for being here and thank you for participating, the artists. And yep, I think that's all I have to say. And it's been a real pleasure to work with all of you for this time and for this show. And I hope we'll carry on doing this always.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing it.
Bye.
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 Bye.